How was your beach trip?
Oh my God, it was nice.
I grew up going.
got out of
You were in Ocean City, New Jersey, right?
What?
You were in Ocean City, New Jersey?
Yes.
Yeah, I grew up going there. I loved it there.
Oh, you did? You grew up there? Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, amazing. These kids, they can't. Yeah.
I was angry before, but I circled the drain in my mind. I can't find. Don't let the sun go down. Don't let the sun go down. I was angry before, but I circled the drain in my mind. I can't find. Don't let the sun go down. Don't let the sun go down. Don't let the sun go down.
He said, Troy told me. I'll be on the beach, I'll keep my shirt. Oh, I'm just doing the phone too. You never know.
Hey Colleen, we're going to do a little check here. Mr. Acker's on the phone, so I'm going to put the microphone down. You let me know if you can hear that. Go ahead, Nora, can you just introduce? Running the meeting in his absence.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the June 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Abington Heights School Board. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
running the meeting.
Have a roll call, please.
Mr. Abdallah,
Here.
Mr. Azar,
Here.
Mr. Fleming,
Here.
Mrs. Henderson,
Here.
Mrs. Karam,
Here.
Mr. Medensky,
Here.
Mr. Robeson,
Here.
Mrs. Tierney,
Here.
Mr. Acker. All present.
Thank you. Next, I think, Dr. Schaefer, we want to make one amendment, a motion to amend the agenda. Is that correct?
Correct. Can everybody hear me back there?
I think you're on.
I'm going to amend action item M to strike the spring athletic EDR positions. This action item was meant to approve athletic EDR positions for the fall and winter. We will come back in the fall and do the approval for the spring. For no other reason other than the spring is somewhat far away and there are changes, so it's in our best interest to do the fall and winter now. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Okay, now I think we have to have a motion to approve the agenda, correct? So can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda now that it's been amended?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the June 1st, the minutes of the June 1st work session?
So moved.
Roll call?
It's June 1st work and May,
And the May.
the May
what's
board
date?
session.
The May
and-
board session
And the June work session.
and the June 1st work
Yeah,
session.
just so we know what we're doing.
The May public meeting and the June 1st work session, correct?
Right, okay.
So can we have a motion for that?
So moved. Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any board reports?
Yes, the AEIO, we had our last meeting in June for the season. I want to thank all the community members that helped us out with our first NEPA Gives fundraiser. We had a great response to that, and it was our first annual, so we're so thrilled that we were able to make the funds that we did. Also, if there's any community member that really shows an interest in sitting on the AEIO board, please contact the website that's on the school district website. We would love to have some new members, some new business owners to sit on our board. It's an incredible opportunity to see all the curriculum enhancements that we help to provide for the district. Thank you.
The Facilities Committee met a week ago to, Mr. Mirabelli reviewed the proposals for the facilities assessment. And,
Oh, your mic, I think you're off.
it's not,
Oh, you're on.
not close enough. So we met a week ago, the Facilities Committee, and we reviewed the facility proposals and ranked them. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fleming. Any other reports? Dr. Schaefer.
Just one.
Oh,
One
sorry.
other.
Mr. Robson.
The IT committee was scheduled to meet last week, but due to some HR activities that we had to do because of certain due dates at the end of the month, we postponed it last week, and it's going to be on the 29th at, I don't know if we landed on 5:30 or 5 o'clock. And so the purpose of that is long-term planning. If you recall, so far, we did a lot of stopgap measures with the switch and the website and things like that. This is more of long-term planning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robson. Dr. Schaefer, do we have a report from our student representative tonight? No. No?
No, we don't.
Okay. All right. Dr. Schaefer, the superintendent's report tonight?
Thank you. I plan to make some comments tonight regarding the budget, and specifically some actions that we have taken in preparation as a leadership team for the 22-23 budget. However, before I start that, I do want to just make a little reminder here that what we'll be posting very soon, Phil just talked about the technology committee. What you could expect is we're working hard right now to make sure that we're going to have that up on the website. The public is invited to all of our committee meetings, so we'll have the time and the date for that. We have not yet set up anything for broadcasting. We are not that sophisticated with the technology for a small meeting, but we'll have that. We'll post the agenda and the minutes, and we're working on that going back. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to email me or give me a call. So at the beginning of this year, and when I talk about this year, I mean January 22, it's always an interesting time as an educator, because I feel as if you have one foot in the current academic year and another foot in the next academic year. We have to start projecting our needs, thinking about setting up the organization and our students to be successful, and asking questions about what are our needs, what are our supports, what's not working as well as we thought. During this process, we've made a few changes, and I wanted to bring those to light because these are some of the things that I've talked about, and I think it's worthy of reiterating. One of the things that we did was we eliminated an Act 93 position in order to add another elementary principal. I believe it's important to have a principal in every building as well as a school counselor. Through some staff optimization moves, we were able to do just that, put a principal and a counselor in every building. We were also able to make some moves to bring another trades teacher to the high school, much needed elective and course. We also were able to add world language every single day for our 7th and 8th graders at AHMS, something that is needed. We are also able to move a STEM teacher up to the middle school to bolster that program and really work to improve where we are relative to what our expectations are for our programs for STEM. We are also adding more instructional math time for our 5th and 6th graders. You can recall in February, March, I did presentations about where we were academically, in part, based on our state assessment results and some anecdotal data that we have. And at our middle school, we noticed that some of our math scores are lagging more as compared to some of our other schools. So this is much needed instructional time back that puts students at the middle school on par with our elementary and high schools relative to instructional time. We were also able to reduce class sizes at the middle school in 7th and 8th grade by about 5 to 6, something that we feel is very important. Adding a dean of students to our middle school. Again, getting that extra support for our students and our families. The middle school does have the highest enrollment out of any school, and did not have an administrative team commensurate with that. We were also able to move our gifted teacher from 0.5 to 1.0. So I just mentioned all of those changes that we're making, and we were able to do that at a cost of $50,000. And we will work as a team to close that gap. That was just through optimization. We also did not, or I should say, we eliminated 4 positions from Kelly Services, secretarial positions, and we added 2 district positions. This resulted in a cost savings for the district close to $40,000. I mention this because as we think about our position and where we are as an organization into next year, I want to make sure that we are communicating some of the changes that we're making and how we think in advance for that. One thing that we have to do as an organization is to always ask the question, are we operating not only efficiently but effectively? And if not, how do we right size that? And always keeping in mind what is best for our students. With that said, that ends the report I have for tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer. Okay, we're going to move on to item 4 on the agenda, public participation. If anyone would like to speak, I would ask you to fill out a card and turn in with your name and your address. We have a few people up here that I'm going to announce. Please remember to state your name and where you're from in the district, and also please limit your comments to 3 minutes. First speaker will be Jerry Carey.
Thank you, board members, for, this is my first time I've ever spoke at one of your meetings, but what I'm speaking on behalf of Clark Summit Borough Council, and one of our Linden Street apartments were sealing their parking lot, and they had to move all their tenants' cars to another area, and we got in touch with Dr. Schaefer's office, and they accommodated them. They offered them the parking in the lower parking lot, and of course our police also allowed them to park on Linden Street. They were extremely grateful. They got in touch with us, and I did recommend them to send a thank you note. And I just wanted to let the board know that anything that Clark Summit Borough can do to work with you back and forth, we'd be more than happy to do that. We've done it over the years and would like to continue. But thanks again for a good job that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carey. Next speaker will be Alicia Vogel.
Good evening. Some of you, most of you might know me. I'm Alicia Vogel. I teach first grade at Clark Summit Elementary. My purpose tonight is to say thank you to all of the administrative staff, school board members, the administrators that are here tonight. Last Tuesday, our last teacher day of school, we had a wellness expo that was put on by the administration, and it was a phenomenal event. I want to express our sincere gratitude and appreciation to everyone that was involved, that worked so diligently to arrange all of the vendors. I went through the list again today, Maggie. I think there were over 30, about 30 of them, and it was just very refreshing for everyone to have that opportunity to interact with the community members and staff members from all different levels, taking the time to educate us in all different aspects of wellness. So much to the point where there are some, Dr. Schaefer was in one that I was in, that the JCC had the sound of healing, and it was incredible to the point where I think that some of it could be implemented in our classrooms. Even I imagine some of my 6 and 7-year-olds in first grade, like some of them would be completely fascinated because it's something new to them. So it was very helpful, very enjoyable, a lot of positive feedback. Then we had a lunch that was provided after. There is a chef on your board here sitting among us that everyone enjoyed, and we had administrators walking around helping. You know, the lines were very long, and Maggie was trying to facilitate to move it along, move it along, move it along. The afternoon, a lot of team building activities. AHEA has been part of an Adopt the Highway program along the stretch of Winola Road before you turn on Noble Road there. So because of COVID, we hadn't had the opportunity to kind of collectively get together, so we were permitted to do that. So all around, I think it was a fabulous day. We really enjoyed it. I'm speaking for all of the faculty, and just collaborating with colleagues and the community, as Mrs. Tierney said, getting people involved. Like, the school district is a focal central point of the community, and I couldn't think of a better way to foster that. So I thank you for that, and I appreciate all of that, and we look forward to what's coming. My next job is to figure out how to cope with the fact on tonight's agenda, one of my former first graders is on the docket to be hired. So I need to figure out which coping one and who I can call for that realization. I know, because I only look like I'm 25. How could that be possible? But thank you again. We all really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vogel. And I know I received a ton of feedback from the community as well, and I think it was a great job by our administration to do that day for our students. And I heard the chef was pretty good also. So great job, Mr. Mirabelli. Next speaker will be Tom Sheehan.
To staple this in the right-hand corner because of the way it printed out. Okay, my name is Tom Sheehan. I live in Waverly. And the hits just keep on coming. This is something I came across recently, and I thought I want to make you aware of it in case you haven't seen it. I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'll take some excerpts here. On the first page, we members of the Civic Alliance convened by the National Association of Scholars call on all U.S. senators, representatives, as well as all concerned American citizens, to oppose the Civics Secures Democracy Act. And we now have another acronym, the CSDA. Whether in its original form, over on the next page, in practice, whether it's in its original or revised form, in practice, the Civics Secures Democracy Act will enable the federal government to impose both critical race theory and, quote, action civics, vocational training for ideologically partisan protest and lobbying upon America's schools. And if you go down about 2/3 of the way down the page, halfway through the last paragraph, far from supporting the teaching of traditional American civics, the Civics Secures Democracy Act will do the opposite. Under the pretense of supporting American civic education, this bill would fund education research and teaching initiatives with an unmistakable ideological agenda. The Biden administration made that clear when it issued priorities for American civics and history grants, guidelines which approvingly referenced the 1619 Project and the work of Ibram X. Kendi. Ibram X. Kendi, just think CRT. The Biden administration history and civics grant guidelines amount to a call for critical race theory in education. And the Civics Secures Democracy Act was funded. So if you go to the second last page, right at the bottom, we note that several other bills, including the Civics Learning Act and the Promoting Programming, Research, Education, and Preservation Civics and Government Act, also promise, as administered by the Department of Education, to be used to support both critical race theory and Action Civics.
Mr. Sheehan, if you could finish your comments. Your 3 minutes are up, but go ahead and finish your comments.
Okay. I've given you my opinion before of the Department of Education and what it's doing with the funds it's handing out. And if they're handing out strings like this, I think we should be aware of it.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. I think that's all the public comment that we have, unless there's someone else that didn't turn in a card. Okay. Okay, we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which are the action discussion items. First, I request a motion from the board to approve the bills.
Second.
On the question?
Yeah, I have a few questions. On the budget analysis, Jim? So it looks like we're wrapping up for this year. This analysis goes to the end of May. We have a budget of a total of $50 million for our revenue, and our expenditures are $52 million. To date, we have, as of May, you have expenditures of $42,260. Do you believe that there's going to be a lot more expenses for this year?
A lot more?
Well, you've budgeted for 52 million. Currently, we have at the end of May 42. So my question is, do you see a lot more expenses coming in that aren't allotted for our June 30th end of our budget?
I absolutely do. For example, our teachers are, so you would pay, there's an additional month of salary and benefits to be paid here, so June, and then our teachers are paid through the summer, so there's 2 more months to be paid there. Those are the major expenses. We also frequently have accounts payable in the range of $400,000 to $600,000, which will get accrued back into this number. There are still things being paid for and purchased through June 30th, which will then be accrued back. So yes, I am projecting significantly more expenses than $42 million that you see on this May report. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'll wait for the treasurer's report because the cash balance is over $9 million as of the end of May. Would that be enough to cover the expenses?
So you're asking if the cash balance...
Well, our treasurer's report is a cash balance as of the end of May is $9 million, almost $10 million that we have in cash. So will those funds be used also to go against the expenses that we will be accruing for the end of the year, for the June 30th?
I'm not sure. We do expend cash to pay for expenditures. It will come out of that checking account. Is that the nature of your question?
Mm-hmm. You've also budgeted for our revenue side of 50 million, and we received 43 million. Are you expecting any more revenue in before the end of the year?
I do. It would be the same answer as that I had on the expense side. We accrue back 60 days worth of revenue. For example, earned income tax when folks file their June quarterlies after the fact, which pertain back to the prior year, we would accrue that revenue back. Any sales of real estate transactions that occur in the month of June or prior, we would accrue that revenue back. So we do keep the books open in essence for 60 days after June 30th. So yes, I do expect a significant amount of revenue to come in as well as a significant amount of expense, which is traditional,
Sure.
Happens every year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, roll call, please.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. Yes. 9-0.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bedensky, could we have the treasurer's report?
Yes, you may. We started the, May Treasury report. We started the month with a total cash of $12,043,639. We had revenues of $2,215,607. We had expenditures of $4,389,456. And we are left with a cash balance going into June, as Mrs. Tierney said, $9,869,789.
Great, thank you very much. Can I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Thank you. And Dr. Schaefer, could you give us the personnel report, please?
Yes, Mr. Azar asks that the board approve the personnel report, numbers 1 through 6.
So
So
moved.
Second.
On the question?
I don't have a question, I have a statement. Pat McGarry will be a loss. He was a great assistant principal, a great teacher at our Abington Heights Middle School. He will be very well missed. We really loved Mr. McGarry, so I'm not sure if he's here tonight, but it was just such an honor to know him and to have him in our building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. I'd echo those comments. I had 3 middle schoolers in his building this year, and they all had huge fondness for him, and he'll be missed by a ton of people. So best of luck to Mr. McGarry and to everyone else on this list. Anyone else? Okay, roll call?
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Mr. Azar had asked that the board consider a motion to approve the agreement with the Children's Service Center for the partial hospitalization program and the therapeutic educational program, along with the HIPAA confidentiality document as contained in item 1.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. Yes. 9-0.
Mr. Azar had asked that the board approve the transportation contracts in item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. Yes. 9-0.
Mr. Azar had asked that the board consider a motion to approve the school board meeting dates for school year 22-23, item number 3.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Abdallah,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker. 9-0.
Mr. Azar had asked that the board consider a motion to approve the agreement between Abington Heights School District and HR Solved to provide human resource support for employee management and reporting as contained in item number 4.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the June volunteer list, item number 5.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the disposal of 4 spectrophotometers from the Abington Heights High School.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
I have a question. Dr. Schaefer, what are they?
What's the spectrometer?
That is a great question, Ms. Tierney, that we do not know the answer to. However, I will recall that we had a previous action item about the disposal of curricular resources. So right now, what we are doing is going through our buildings to find obsolete equipment in order to create some more space. I imagine this may be in the realm of microfiche.
That's a
I
good
don't know.
answer. Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? On the question, or sorry, roll call?
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the Abington Heights Athletic Director job description as contained in item number 6.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Well, this is revised, right? This is a different one than we had the
Yes,
last time?
correct. This
Okay.
is revised. One of the financial questions relative to the booster clubs has been revised by Jim.
Okay, great, thanks.
Roll call?
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask the board to consider a motion to approve the agreement with Brian T. Kelly, CPA, and Associates LLC for new required regulatory reporting as a result of the adoption of GASB 87 and SAS numbers 134 through 45 as contained in item 7.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask the board to consider a motion to approve the 2022-23 final general fund budget as contained in item number 8.
So moved. Second.
Okay, so on the question, I just want to slow things down a bit here for a second. I think we're going to spend some time talking about this topic. Obviously, we've had 2 extensive presentations by Jim Mirabelli, and I just want to compliment Jim on just how much data was put in front of the board. We really didn't talk a lot about it after those 2 meetings, and I'd like to go through a few things today. I know some of the other board members have expressed that they would like to as well. I have a few slides. I was just going to talk, but when I talk, I create slides. It's just, what I do. So I'm going to go through these slides, but I would ask any board member, as I'm going through each of the first couple of slides are really just data, and then I do have some of my own views on some slides. But I would ask board members to just chime in, raise your hand if you want to talk for a while about anything that I have up here. So this, it's coming up. Okay, it'll be up here in a second. So while that's warming up, I'll talk a little bit about this first slide and explain what I'd like to start with. So, there we go. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. So on this page, what I tried to do, and this is an insult to Mr. Mirabelli, to try and put his world onto one page, right? The stack of information that backs up these numbers is almost as high as this room. But certainly I'm a new board member. I've only been on the board for a year and a half. We have some other new board members. I know a lot of these board members that have been here for a long time know these numbers certainly a lot better than we do. But in the last few weeks, few months, I've gotten a lot of questions from people that I know in the community about our budget. And I know that a lot of people in the community don't really know this stuff. I've been in finance my whole life, and it's not simple, and I think it's helpful as we discuss what we're discussing tonight, which is a big deal. It's helpful for us to go through this again, and I don't want to ask Mr. Mirabelli to repeat everything that he's repeated the last couple of meetings where he did do extensive presentations, but there have been a few changes, Mr. Mirabelli, since your last presentation, and before I ask you to sort of review those, what I laid out here for everybody's benefit behind me, on the left is this is our projected budget for the coming year. At the top are the revenues that are projected, local, state, and federal. You can see very heavy local. And then the expenses underneath, obviously, are laid out by category. Based on our projections so far, if we do nothing, if we don't raise local taxes this year, we would have a $3.3 million deficit based on our projected budget. And if we do raise what's recommended by administration, we would have still a $2.5 million projected deficit. And then on the right, these are our savings accounts, basically. So just like you have at home, we have money set aside for other things, not for our operations, not for our salaries, our payroll, our services, for other stuff, basically. So I'll go into that in a minute. But Jim, if you could just talk for a little bit about some of the changes that maybe have taken place since your last presentation.
So when I presented, can everybody hear me? Doesn't seem to be coming through. Okay, so I had committed to the board that we would be making some changes between the preliminary budget and the final budget, and I'm coming to you tonight to let you know what those changes were. On the revenue side, we are listening closely to what's coming out of Harrisburg, and although there isn't much coming out of Harrisburg, we're not hearing much for bad news in terms of what the subsidy may be. So we revised our revenue estimate from the state upward by 1% for a total increase of 2% over the current year subsidy. We also made some revenue adjustments on real estate taxes based on the delinquent tax collectible amount, as well as some of the tax appeals that are going on in the real estate tax assessment world. We also revised our earnings estimates in this interest rate environment. I expect we'll be able to earn some more funds on our deposits. And that's basically the highlights from the revenue side between what changed from the last presentation to this side. And then on the expense side.
Excuse me, Jim, could you actually give some financial numbers with those revenue sides?
Those numbers are contained in the document that is set forth, but just for edification, increase in state revenue was about $100,000 between the basic ed and the special ed increase there. The difference in local revenue, when you consider the refined revenue estimates, was actually negligible. It changed the entire local revenue amount by $1,000. So I'm just alerting you that there were some revisions in those specific line items there.
So that's not reflected in these numbers, right? The changes that you're.
This is the updated.
This is the updated.
Yeah, they are. This is the updated. This is the updated that you received today, correct? This is the
That was
summary
sent
of
out last week.
Or last week. This is the updated.
What I'm reviewing now are the changes between the
Yeah.
preliminary budget, which was adopted in May, and the final budget, which was sent out to the board last week.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then on the expense side, we had some reclassifications, budget neutral for expenses related to substitutes. So we made a change of about $470,000 to move it from one line item to the other. We'll still be employing substitutes, just in a different way. We also.
So that's just a shift in the line item, right?
Correct, budget
That
neutral.
has no, okay.
But for full disclosure, I'm noting, the changes that I made. We also reclassified some provisions for salary estimates for future increases for certain categories of employees who have unsettled contracts with the district, which was budget neutral. There was no monetary change there. Also, in response to the uncertainty with charter schools, we increased the budgetary reserve by $250,000. It's our initiative to reduce that number greatly. However, there is great uncertainty there, right? So in the event that something goes there, this is not a budgeted line item that we plan to spend. It's a budgetary reserve if something goes wrong, right? So that's what it's there for. Most years, we don't touch the budgetary reserve. It's not a slush fund. It's just there if there's a cost overrun. And in a year of great uncertainty, it's commensurate to have a higher budgetary reserve.
Can you give us an estimate on what we spent on charter schools last year and comparative to what we spent this year?
I can answer the question now. To give you an idea, in 1920, it was $981,904. In 2020-21, it was $1,988,159. And then 21-22 projected is at $1,758,281. And as Jim mentioned, we were working hard to make sure that we have discussions with our families in the district who have chosen the charter route to reorient them to some of the programs that we have, and hopefully they could come back to our schools.
So you're budgeting more students leaving our district?
Our budget estimate includes a goal of reducing the number of students. So in the budget, I think we have about 1.45 is our projected spend for next year. The $250K in budgetary reserve is if folks make a different choice, the budgetary reserve is there because we don't have the legal authority to spend over the total budgeted dollar amount. So yes, we're budgeting to plan to reduce that number because of the active engagement. We think we can get there, but budgetary reserve is there for great uncertainty.
So this year's budgetary reserve that you put in from last year, you have the numbers of what we spent on charter schools. Was there money left over? Did you budget accurately? Did we have a deficit? Did we have to pay more? Did we have to use that reserve?
I believe we're spending more than we budgeted for, yes. We budgeted about $1.6 million. We started off the year right on the money for about the first 2 months. Circumstances changed and, you know, the rate went up. So we will see a negative variance in that budget line item. But we did create some budgetary reserve for items like that.
Thank you.
And beyond that, there were some minor inflationary adjustments in things like electricity. We just learned that the cost of copy paper is about doubled, things of this nature. So we're dealing with inflationary items just as every other consumer is, excuse me. So we made some inflationary adjustments to line items such as that.
Thanks, Jim.
So just for clarification, last year's total budget was what for the last fiscal year?
Just give me one moment, please.
So 48 million?
48 million in revenue.
$6 million increase year over year.
The budget expenses? Or
What did we spend last year?
what do we spend?
Oh, what are the expenses?
Budgeted at 47, almost 48 million dollars, but we spent 50 million. I'm sorry. We budgeted 50 million for us, so we spent 50 million. However, if you remember correctly, I think there was $3 million fund balance back in that we put in there.
A bond return?
Right.
Yep,
Really
$3 million.
not expense item. This went
That's right.
No.
No, from our bond.
We didn't
Oh, from the bond, that's right, yeah, that's right.
But we treat that as an expense for this purpose, but it's really not an expense.
Yeah,
So really, you should take $3 million off of that for expenditures, it's only around 47.
That's right.
Last year?
The prior year budget amount is in your treasurer's report, and you can compare the 2 years handily. I just can't access it right now because my computer's on the screen.
So does that make sense, Jim, that it was 47 million last year?
That is not a correct number. The number was $52.4 million was the expense for the current year.
That's what we budgeted.
Mike was asking for last year's.
That's
Last
current
year's.
year would be
The year ended.
when you compare 2022 to 23 to the current year, that would be
The year ended next week.
the year immediately preceding it.
Okay, so.
Were you asking what the budgeted expenses were for last year or the actual
Yeah,
projected?
We're talking about 54.2 million, right? This year.
Projected.
For projected.
Yep.
For the next, for this fiscal year.
Right.
What was it last year?
The projected.
No, the actual.
Oh, the actual. Well, we don't have that done yet. but-
So 2 years ago, during the COVID year, where expenses were down because we were closed, I will obtain that number for you as well. Just give me another minute. Thank you. So the actual spent in 2021 is $50.6 million. That was before we added 10 or 12 additional teachers.
That was the year ended June 30th, 2021, is what you're saying, right?
Correct.
And is what Greg is saying about the $3 million bond payment, that is taken off the top. That's included as an expense in the 50.6 million?
I'm not sure, I didn't hear the question. What is the question?
We had an inter-fund transfer of $3 million because of the debt.
That was a transfer to the capital reserve fund and transfer to the debt service fund. The debt service is about $1.2 million. And
That was treated as an expense that's included in this fund, correct?
that's correct.
Right, so our actual expenses that we spent out is only 47.
I don't have the number in front of me, but, right, you have to consider all the COVID-related savings that occurred in that year. We didn't pay 100% of our transportation project, so there were a number of savings. We didn't pay substitute teachers because folks were virtual, no overtime, things of this nature. So it's a year, it's apples and oranges in my view.
That was your point. Mr. Fleming, you were questioning the big jump rate, so
Yeah,
some of that.
That's my concern, about the big jump. I'm just trying to reconcile the big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know the detailed numbers, but certainly there were a lot of the expenses that would normally occur in a school year weren't happening, so I don't know what the magnitude of that is, but.
Correct. So it was high, it was a large magnitude, but then subsequent to that lower spending year, we added 10 or 12 positions, which is $1.2 million.
Right.
But did we use our stimulus money for those salaries up until year 23, 24?
Yeah, but that's the expenses.
Yes, but that's not relevant to the expense side of the equation.
Those are revenues that are covering those expenses, but the expenses went up dramatically quickly because of those lower expenses during COVID, plus we did hire last summer 10 new teachers. That just increased the raw expenses. They're covered for the next couple of years because of the ESSER funds, but they're not, the expenses still went up.
Yeah.
Right.
And how much attrition do we expect? I mean, I know that's a tough question, but I would assume that there's some professional staff attrition that we'll realize in the coming year. Do we have any understanding of that?
That's not something I can comment on. We do have about a third of our staff at the top of scale, but beyond, I'm budgeting what a status quo maintaining service budget as I've described all along through this process, and I'm not projecting any additional savings. We've hired folks, we've adjusted the salaries down to what they are or up. Because it's a different job market now. We're not hiring at step one a lot of the times. So the salaries in this budget are the folks that we've identified that are coming next year. So we wouldn't have any attritional savings to project in the current, in the 22-23 budget.
But that could be a cost savings, yes.
Occur,
Yeah. It could happen, you can't project that, so it's not.
The same way I can't project if a kindergarten class goes over 26 and we have to hire another teacher a month from now.
Right.
But I think it's a safe assumption that we will have some attrition this coming year. I know, I'm not asking.
You can't comment on it, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, it has happened every year, I mean, I would think, but you don't know what the magnitude is gonna be.
I took a few minutes to look at our audit that we received for June 30th, 2020-21, that we received, I think, maybe February, March from last year. And I just kind of read the highlights. We approved a budget with a deficit. We hired 10 plus positions. We had contractual raises. We had earmarked technology. We have a plan for a feasibility study, which I know we're working on now, but we had that in the works, in the thoughts last fall. We ended the year with a surplus of $2.5 million, 105.3% of the budget. We had invested in a new track in turf field. We had met all of our obligations and mandates. We paid our pension. We had our salaries and benefits. We increased our special ed expenses. We paid all of our charter expenses. We actually even drew down some of our debt. And we have we've also have well over the required percentage for our general funds. And we did not raise taxes. And I think that's important for all of us to see. It is a very difficult time for us when we don't have all of the information in front of us, for us to make this kind of a decision tonight. This revised budget was just handed to us a few days ago. So I think we need to really look at this a little bit more seriously tonight. Rod, I'd like you to
we'll keep going
with your slides. But I think it's important for us to know the history here and know where we're starting, so we can get a pulse on where we go and project our future.
Yep. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this slide before we won't spend as much time on every slide as I want, I promise. Yep.
Should we explain to the audience what the different funds are?
Yeah, sure. So Jim, you want to handle that one?
Sure. Our general fund balance, think of that as your normal checking account balance. And I'm going to go quickly because we've talked about this twice already this year. So the capital reserve fund is used for projects that are capital in nature, infrastructure type projects that the district chooses to invest in. You cannot use these funds for things like paying the electricity bill or salaries. Health insurance fund is used to pay claims out because we're self-insured. We pay premiums, I'm using air quotes, to ourselves out of the general fund into the health insurance fund, and then the claims are paid out of this fund. In years where the premiums we pay to ourselves are higher than what the claims are, the balance will go up. In years when the opposite is true, it will go down. This balance has been right around that same $7 million mark for quite some time now. The food service fund is our cafeteria operation, and those funds can only be used to serve our students in the cafeteria. Debt service fund is simply an in and out. We transfer funds from the general fund to the debt service fund, and then we go and pay our bonds through that fund. Good?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because that number is pretty accurate. The capital fund. It's a net number.
Okay, so we've committed to a few projects, namely the South Abington Elementary roof, about $300,000 in information technology upgrades, and those are the two that are coming to my mind at this point.
They're not included in the 4.4 that's already been allocated.
That's 4.4 net of those expenses, correct? Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yep.
And what's expected for next year? What's budgeted for the next fiscal year?
For capital?
For capital.
Those are the two. Currently there's a facility study out.
Right.
We've only identified here what has been approved by the board. I don't have a specific capital
so there's no
budget.
big project right now earmarked for that 4.4. Right?
That's part of the work that we'll be doing through our facility study procedure.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Anybody else? So if you flip to the next page, this is something that I put together. If I was not on the board, and even being on the board, these are the three questions that I would ask when told. Oh, can you flip the page? Sorry, oh, it's frozen. No, I didn't get to it. I just wanted to put it up here. There we go. So these are the three questions that I think are the the instinctive normal questions to ask whenever the topic of a deficit comes up is how do you solve it? So the first one I put on here because I got this from a lot of people in the community. Can't we use some of our reserve funds? We have $23 million in reserves. Why can't we tap into that instead of raising taxes? Why can't we tap into that to do other things that people want in the school district? You know, all-day kindergarten, other things that we all hear about. And so the point that I make here in the first two bullets, and I'm going to ask Jim to tell me if I'm wrong, but more than half of those funds, it's not legal to use for budget items. I think that's what you were just saying, Jim, right? The capital reserve, the healthcare reserve, we can't use those funds for, is that correct?
You cannot pay for ongoing expenses out of those
funds.
two funds.
Right.
You can't pay directly.
Okay. So that leaves us with the general fund, and I use the analogy of in your house, right? If you have money in the bank, everybody should for emergencies. That's really what the general fund is, and it's a significant number, and we can have a debate on if it's the right size number. But you can't budget to use the general fund for a deficit. You should really balance your budget, and that's the reason why that money is not technically available, unless we as a board decide that we think that number is too big and we should move that money somewhere else, maybe to capital, maybe spend it. So other than that, I don't know that there's any other topics to discuss relative to the reserve funds, but I just wanted to point that out. And I'll just go through this, and then if everybody wants to jump in with their thoughts. So could we make meaningful reductions to our expenses to close the deficit? We've done that in the past as a school district, right? There's been a long history here for well over a decade of doing that. We've had deficits before. Other people can speak to that better than I can. And we've done things to reduce the deficit and have a surplus in some years. I think that, as Dr. Schaefer mentioned, we're certainly working hard on cyber school, and that's a huge unknown. We could have a windfall this year if we're successful, or it could be worse. It's really hard to project that. The only other real ways to solve on the expense side that have a meaningful impact is to cut stuff. Just to cut teachers, cut administration, cut staff. If you think you have too much, cut services, cut programs, cut athletics, and that is something that is certainly on the table to do as an option. I'm just laying out options here. The third question is, okay, well, what could you do on the revenue side? How can you have higher, other than raising taxes, how could you increase our revenue? So I listed three things. You could certainly have positive changes in state and federal revenues. I wouldn't bank on that, but that could happen. Federal is a very small part of our budget. State's significant. That could change, but unlikely. We could have positive surprises in earned income taxes and real estate transfer taxes. We did the last couple of years. Earnings were way up. Real estate transactions were way up. So we had some nice surprises. So that's possible. That could continue. But it's probably not prudent to rely on, especially given the environment right now with the economy. The last one on here, this is something that I think really does have legs. Not this year, not next year. But there was an article in the paper today, excuse me, about the reassessment that's happening in Lackawanna County. We haven't had a reassessment since I was not born yet. And then I'm dating myself, but 1960s. So there's a lot of issues with reassessment. I don't want to get into the political football of reassessment, but the dynamics of reassessment that could be positive, it's not going to make us any more money. I've heard that too from people, like, well, when we have a reassessment, our revenues are going to go up. They're not. It's just that people in the community are going to have potentially definitely different taxes. People that have underassessed properties are going to pay more. People that have overassessed properties are going to pay less. But the revenues that the school district are going to have, the moment that that's done, are the same. It's the future that could change. So ask anybody that develops commercial or residential real estate in the Abingtons. And there's been some, but there has not been a ton, not as much as some other school districts have had. One of the reasons is that if you build a new house in the Abingtons or you develop a property, it's a huge tax bill. That's the dynamic, and that could change, and I think that could stimulate some growth, but we're talking about 3-4 years from now, and just the start of it. So that's a big positive, but it's not something that is going to help us in the next couple of years. So I just laid this out because I think it's helpful to to talk about how can we fix this problem? What are our options? So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on these questions or other topics as it relates to the deficit that the administration is projecting. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the next few slides I'll go through quickly. These are ones that I sincerely pirated from Mr. Mirabelli, and I just overlaid some data. In the last 12 years, on this slide here, go to the next one. This is showing that in the last 12 years, Abington Heights has only raised taxes by 5% in the aggregate. The second lowest is North Pocono at 4 times the level of Abington Heights. And then the average is almost 30%. So clearly we've significantly not raised taxes for the last at least 12 years. That's how far the data went back that Mr. Mirabelli showed us. So if you flip to the next page, it's not printed out well here. So this is a line chart that shows the actual increases. And you can see the average per year for Abington Heights is 0.4%. The next lowest school district is 1.6%, that's North Pocono, per year for the last 12 years. So this is some of the, like when we went through this presentation, I didn't even realize it when I looked at the charts. So I wanted to sort of digest it and look at the magnitude on a per year basis. And what does that mean? So if we had just, it's on the next slide, but you can stay on this slide. If we had just matched North Pocono with tax increases over the last 12 years and raised at an average rate of 1.6% per year, we'd still be tied for the lowest in the county. We'd still be able to say that we were, among the lowest of the spectrum. That's over $4 million of revenues that didn't come into the school district that benefited the taxpayers for sure. If we were at the average, which is 2.1% for the other 9 schools per year, it would have been over $6 million. So I know there were reasons why we did what we did, and there was a lot of, I've been a taxpayer myself, and everybody likes it when their taxes don't go up, but there are ramifications for that. And if you feel that you don't need to do it, then you don't do it. But I wanted to lay out the numbers of what that impact has been. So if you can flip to the next one. So this is what I just articulated. This is the dollar impact, and you can go one more now. So these next 2 slides are the ones that really, and I'm starting to get into what my views are, and then I'm going to ask everybody else to chime in, obviously. These are the 2 slides that really impacted me a lot. I had no idea, really, of any of this math when I applied to run for the school board. And I was really, really surprised to see that our revenue per student was as low as it is. So there's roughly 500 school districts, and we've gone through this before with Mr. Mirabelli, but I think it's worth talking about again. There's 500 public school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. We're 492nd as of 2020. This is a little dated information. In revenue per student. So the amount of revenue that we're bringing in as a school district per student, we're at almost the very bottom. So what does that mean? How could we be great? And we are. We have great academics. We have incredible performance. And I believe that it's not because we've, as a community, done what other communities have done. It's because the parents and the teachers have done what they've done. I know what goes on in my house, not me, but my wife. And we have a lot of people that do that, booster clubs, PTAs. It's an amazing community. The issue that I have is that if you keep doing that, eventually it's going to catch up. And you can't, we're to a lot of school districts, people look up to us, and we have a lot of responsibility there. But there are a lot of other school districts that compete for talent when people move to this area, and people move back to this area. And my fear is that if we continue to be ranked this low, that we're not going to be able to stay on top. We're gonna suffer if we do. The next slide is just a sort of the inverse of the revenue side. So spending per pupil, and what's really shocking to me about this slide is if you look at the other 3 lines. So Abington is the blue line. So our spending per student is $3,700 less than the state average. That's not the state high mark, that's the state average. But there's 2 other lines on here that are also pretty relevant. The regional average, which is school districts in northeastern Pennsylvania, and then the peer group average, which is school districts like Abington Heights all over the state. And all three of those lines are really tight together, and we are way below. And what I mentioned before about $4 to $6 million of revenues, if we were just at either the next school up or the average, the difference here is over $10 million if we were at the average. And we're not going to do that overnight, but I think it really blew me away that this is the difference between us and other school districts. And some people think that it's a good thing, and some people think that it's a bad thing. I clearly, I'm not real happy with it. I certainly don't want to be at the top, right? We shouldn't aspire to be spending more than anybody in the state. But I also don't think that we should be 492 in the state. So go ahead, Ms. Tierney.
Unless someone else wants to speak, I've been speaking a bit. Does anyone else want to comment on anything? I have a total different opinion on that number there and that where we are. I look at efficient and effectiveness. We have a business manager that we have put to task, and he's done an incredible job. We have a great success here of our student population. We have a 98% graduation class. We have a orchestra that I actually went to the orchestra show in the spring. There was not room for one more instrument, or cello, or anything on that stage. I look at that as success. I look at our SAT scores. I look at our student education. I also understand that part of that formula is our facilities. I have been an advocate for facilities and our structures for 17 years. I know we don't have the best of the best. We have incredible students. We have an incredible business manager that we hold to task. So I look at this as a very successful number. We have never been delinquent on our bills. We have fund balances that are well above the percentages that the state recommends for us to have. We have a great bond rating. We have increased and spent money on fields. It is a process. So should we spend more on our students? If it means that we need to do more in our facilities, 100%, I'm with you on that one. But the fact that we have such a phenomenal academic level that can always get better and better and better, but we've held our money down and our spending down to produce a great student.
Thank you, Mr. Mrs. Carroll.
Jim, I think my microphone is not working. Was it working? Okay, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about a couple notes on, one, congratulations for being so efficient, but you have recommended that we increase the tax revenue to keep up, correct?
Administration had made that recommendation, yes.
And one of the things that we're looking at with the crisis that we're seeing in revenue and spending is the cyber charter loss, correct?
That's correct.
Can you go over how we determine how much we spend per charter student, the numbers, and I have them in front of me, so I'm asking you to just go over this for everyone else. The number we spend per student based on this slide in particular, and the number that we spend per student when they go to charter academies, and where we get that accounting from. Does that make sense?
Sure. So the tuition that we pay to cyber charter schools and brick and mortar charter schools for that matter is based on our budgeted expenditures for the next year. So even though cyber charters have a very different cost structure than brick and mortar public schools and less regulation, they use our expenses to determine what the tuition rate will be. There's a form called PDE 363. After we approve next year's budget, we'll take the numbers from that budget, we'll put every line item in. There are a few exclusions that you take out of the calculation, and it spits out a number. Currently, that number is $11,000 for a regular ed student that goes to cyber, and $21,000 for a special ed student that goes to cyber or brick and mortar charter.
So this number on this graph where we spend $13,000 per student, does that include our special ed students, or would they be spent higher? Or is that part of the average?
If we were to break this calculation apart, there would be a difference there. This is an aggregate per student, so it's sort of a blended rate if you want to look at it that way.
I do have one more question, and this might be for Rod. Can you go back to the slide, please, with the tax percent increases? So I suppose the question that I'm trying to ask is, and forgive me if this doesn't come out correctly, were these other schools in some respect playing catch up to the revenue side? So in other words, all these school districts went up. There was a slide earlier on in one of your last presentations where school districts went up like 20 to 30% over 10 years, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Most school districts went up, all school districts went up by 20 to 36% over the last 12 years.
Were they?
In my county.
Okay, and so was our base already high enough? Do you see what I'm trying to ask?
Our base was higher if you go back to that. If you look at the beginning of that chart, we were at the higher end on a millage basis, but it's not apples to apples that way. It's not to say that this is just a raw beginning point of tax millage. Each
Okay.
school district has a different calculation of what their millage is and their assessments. What really matters is the trend of the lines. We were at the high end though of the millage, and by the end of this we were at the low end.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you.
But you have to be careful with that number too, because of the assessed values, we have 5 of the top 6 in this entire area of assessed values. So ours are like, say, 17, 19, 20. There's only one other community that's even in that mix. At the same time, I'm going to say out of all our school districts, we pay the highest tax rates of everybody else. We're 5 of the top 12 of tax rates. So yes, our millages and our tax rates were higher to begin with over that whole course. So you can get a little confusing here with the data.
And
So-
what this chart tells us is all the tax increases for these different school districts. It does not tell us the school district's budgets, what their spending is, what their balances are, what their deficits are. So we have no knowledge. I mean, I haven't looked at every other school district that's listed here and to see their budget. So really all this information is saying to us what other school districts did as far as raising taxes. And, I think it's very important for us to be mindful of our budget as it, you can compare, but you can't really compare them because we have no knowledge of what their fiscal, balance is at any level.
Yeah, I agree. The value in the comparison, though, is it's a pretty good sampling of 10 other school districts. In the last 12 years, we've raised revenues 3 times, and the next one from us is 7, and that's only one school, Lakeland. And then all the other schools are 8 or 9 times. It's a dramatic difference. If it was 1, I wouldn't say that it wasn't a trend, but it certainly seems like, and I wish I had data for a much bigger sampling than this. My understanding, and through my discussions with administration and with others, is that it's not abnormal. And this is some of the stuff that I want to get into on the last page. So if I could go to that last page. Yeah. So one thing that I think that people have to get their arms around is that when a school district raises taxes, it's not the same as when a state government or a federal government raises taxes. We have an asset-based tax. We do not have a sales tax or an income tax that goes up with inflation. So the only way for us to move the needle, other than the other stuff in the revenue boxes, right? We can hope for real estate transfer taxes. We can hope the state and the feds help us. We can hope that the assessments go up. The only way we can move the needle is if we physically move that needle as a school board. And we have 75% of our expenses, payroll and benefits, are escalating. This is where like it does, like you can complicate it, but you can also make it very simple. 75% of our expenses go up every year by over 3% because it's contractual. Staff, administration, and teachers. And that's normal. That's not abnormal. Everybody in the world that works, typically has throughout their career those kind of escalations. Ours are contractual. And then the rest of our budget escalates by inflation. That's been pretty low for the last 30 years until 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and now it's really high. So if we have a budget of expenses that have those kind of contractual escalations in it, that's why I get to my second point, where to me it seems, based on what I've, and I have not looked at all 500 school districts, but it seems like it's common and normal for school districts to gently, not by the full index every year, but to gently raise taxes to keep up with their costs. A lot more frequently than Abington Heights has in the last 12 years. We have very significant projected deficits, not just this year, but in future years. The fourth one on the point of facilities, which you mentioned, Ms. Tierney. I don't want to get too far into this because we have a deficit problem without the facility needs. We have massive facility needs based on the feedback from our community and our surveys and based on our discussions as a board. And we have no way to pay for them other than $4.4 million in our capital reserve. Because we have structural deficits, we have no way to pay for them unless we increase revenues. And as Mr. Mirabelli said, we're now at a point, because we have an index that you can't go higher than, we are going to be very hard pressed to find revenues to support the type of facilities renovations that we might get back from the study. But I lay that out here as a point because it is something that we need to fund. But even without that, I think the rest of this holds water. And the last point, and I'll turn it back over to everybody else, that I want to make is when you invest in your school district, even if you don't have kids in the school district, you get a return on your investment. If you look at the best school districts in the state, go look at the real estate values in that community. Not just our state, every state. Now go look at the worst communities that have the toughest issues and the lowest taxes. Their real estate values don't move, they're stagnant. So nobody likes the tax word. I don't like it, right? I'm still getting deeper into these numbers, but I do believe that there is a major return on investment for Abington Heights to remain excellent. And I agree with you, Ms. Tierney, we are. And what I am focused on, though, is not what we are and what we've been, is how do we stay there? So, Mr. O'Donnell.
If we don't do anything, let's just say we say status quo, and we get the facility study back, and we get the police study back, do we have any money to do anything from a safety standpoint?
So from a safety standpoint, I think that goes back to that that the 4.4 million estimated left over. Is it enough? I think when the facility study and the related estimates come back, I think that would be, it will pale in comparison to what might come back and get recommended based on some other facility studies I've seen in the past and just observations of the conditions of things.
Okay.
But that's anecdotal,
Okay.
my observation.
Anyone else?
I have
Ms.
a couple things I wanted to share, but when we, I guess just for the general public, when we're hearing 3.4%, can you give us some idea of what that actually looks like? Because we're hearing like, oh, the max, but in terms of like spending, what does that look like for the average, let's say, family?
So the median assessed value is $20,000 in Abington Heights School District. So when you apply a 3.4% increase on top of the current taxes, you would get a number about $84, if I'm remembering correctly from my last presentation, about $84
Per year.
additionally. But the other motion on your agenda this evening is the homestead farmstead exclusion, which the state, for the first time since its inception, has provided more funds toward homestead farmstead credits to the tune of, I think, $38. So that would net against the increase and bring it down to, it would blunt it to somewhere between $40 and $50 increase in this current year. And that's not to minimize the impact of a tax increase. I'm just, to the taxpayer, they will also see the credit coming off as well as any increase that is decided upon.
A year, correct? That's for a year, not a month.
Per year.
Per year.
Oh, that,
Yeah.
for a year, yes.
Okay.
And be careful, the 20,000 assessed, that's the median. So, I mean, you have people that are a lot higher and some people that are lower, so, you know, you can do the math.
Okay.
Anyone else?
One other, oh, go ahead.
Mr. Medensky.
No, that's fine, go ahead. I mean, I just want to say, like, you know, to increase taxes is not something that I think, I can't speak on everyone's behalf, but that I don't think we take lightly. You know, and as school board directors, you know, it's our duty to do things that are fiscally responsible. You know, and like Mr. Azar said, you know, we want to keep property values up. You know, and there's other variables that we can look at. You know, we're always looking at grants. We can look to community and corporate partnerships to increase money, but all of those things are unknowns. And when we're looking at the money, you know, it's definitely concerning. And, you know, I have said since day one, as a new school board member, I have a lot of respect for the, you know, former board and administration for the fiscally conservative decisions that they made. But now, you know, and as a new member, you know, I have a different perspective as a parent and having a background in education. And I've said to, I think, almost every school board, other school board director, that I never want my opinions or perceptions to be seen as me being critical. But I think, you know, when you bring in new people, you're bringing in new perspective and ideas. So, and I don't think, you know, it doesn't really serve us well to, you know, look in the rearview mirror and say, this is what should have been done. I think it's our duty to look at, you know, what are the needs, what decisions can we make that are reflective of what our district and our community as a whole needs now. And I know, you know, in the past, former administration cut teaching positions, and I was so happy to see that they were brought back. I know Dr. Mahan referred to, I guess the status as something along the lines of staff light. So I remember hearing him speak in a meeting last spring that philosophy, you know, it really was apparent during the pandemic. You know, we always have gaps in learning, gaps in needs, and that gap was exponentially bigger. My concern is, you know, we want to be able to sustain what we have. And I think adding those 10 positions last summer and adding the positions that we are for next year they're critical. And, you know, when we're talking about having to cut positions, you know, that's a huge concern. I'm sure not just for me, but for others. But as a parent and someone with a background in education, you know, I'm in the buildings. I, you know, run a nonprofit empowerment program for girls in grades 3rd through 8th grade, and the difference in the needs of our students, it's a dramatic difference. You know, these kids are struggling, families are struggling, you know, and I think we just need to continue to make sure that we're investing. You know, our goal is to educate the whole child. You know, making sure that we're continuing. I think we've done a great job this year looking at curriculum, but continue to look at how we can improve those academic enhancements and support them on a social and emotional level. And I just think, you know, as a part of that is we need to be mindful of when we're supporting our children. It's a matter of making sure that we have adequate staffing and that we're supporting our staff. And I just think that that's something that when I hear like, oh, we're going to have to cut staff, that's a huge concern, because I don't think we would be serving our children well in doing that. So like I said, you know, a tax increase is not something that any of us, you know, necessarily want, but at this point, you know, I think we just need to make decisions that are going to help sustain what we have. and just look at how we're going to invest in our community and the district as a whole. So,
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mrs. Tierney?
Gretchen, I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you for complimenting the former board and the hard work they did. And as a former board director and a current board director, I really appreciate your point of view and your newness. It does help us to collectively make a team decision. To get back to the topic of annually raising taxes. Unfortunately, the way our state funding formula is out there, it does make it so most of us board directors in different districts across the state of Pennsylvania, if we think that we are being fiscally responsible, we should be raising taxes every year just to keep us afloat. That was a philosophy that we worked very hard in not doing, to become more fiscally responsible and finding ways to never cut because we don't have the funds, but to cut because it was an efficient way to make our programs better without the expense if you could. And it's a balancing act, and every year it is harder and harder to balance that. We put the task to Mr. Mirabelli every year to come back and give us, take from here, do from there, do this, do that. It is very difficult, in my opinion, to raise taxes when you have the solid funds that we have. I know everyone thinks differently. We are a very sound school district. We have never been delinquent. Do we need facility updates? You bet we do. We have to be fiscally responsible and plan. So fortunately, we have a feasibility study that we are in the process of doing. We hope to have the findings of that by the fall, which will give us enough time if we decide on doing major projects to apply for a referendum. You talked about the needle. There are other ways. You can borrow money. You can put up a referendum if you qualify in the right time, and you let the community vote on whether or not they want what we're asking for. And then you have a capital campaign where we go out and the district goes out and we work with corporations to raise funds. There are different ways to continue to annually tax our community because we need to keep up with inflation, we need to keep up with income. I personally find that really hard to do. I look each year, it is a different year. And this year, I believe because inflation is so crazy, gas prices are so crazy, we can afford to stay where we are right now without raising taxes. I had earlier a month ago suggested that we negotiate and maybe not go to the full index. No one bit on that. So I find it very difficult for us to raise taxes at this time. We have had a deficit, balanced deficit, every year for the last 5 or 6 years, and we have been able to pay all of our bills and transfer funds and be able to be afloat, and we are a solid, fiscally responsible school district.
Thank you. Mr. Abel.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Nope, I'm good. I decided.
Mr. Manetsky.
Mr. Azar, your data is very good, and that's one data point. But I can also say and reverse that and say, well, maybe the higher cost per student doesn't mean better all the time, because I look at the school districts are in there, and we rank as in the top 10 of the state. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't spend more. I'm not saying that. I just believe it's one data point. There's a lot, and you commented on it. It's our community, it's our parents, and how we perceive what we need to do for our kids to make them better. And we have great success in that respect. So it is not just how much money you spend for the student. There's a lot of other factors in there, and I think we should continue those discussions, because maybe there's other things we can do to even promote some of those things. Just wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to mention was, and some of the other long-term board members may remember this, but when I first came on the board, the gloom and doom of the next several years and that chart going way down, we have seen that in every budget discussion, and I was like, oh my God, we got to raise taxes because we need money. Every year we see that, the status quo and how that analysis is. And again, to Michelle's point, we look at it every single year, and every single year changes, and the data is all changed. The last 2 years were unbelievable what we had to go through to make it. But we tend to be able to either break even or close every single year. And I strongly believe we'll be able to do that again this year, because what the figures are, and they don't stay the same from month to month. It's like things get accrued. But I don't believe we're going to be in a hole. Now next year that could be totally different. So, but I don't get too concerned when I see that downward slide, because we've seen it every year, and it really hasn't come true any of those years.
Mr. Abella.
I'm good.
Mrs. Henderson.
I hear the doom and gloom piece, but I also think, what we have in front of us now is different than what it has been several years ago. I mean, we have the facility study out, and we don't know what they're going to come back with. We have some guesses. And our goal is, we have to improve building safety. We want, to send our kids to schools that are the safest possible. We also want to make sure that our children feel safe when they're at school. And, one way that the district was able to save money was not investing in the facilities. And I know Mrs. Tierney spoke about investing in the facilities, but I think when we come back with that report, we get that information back, it might be shocking. There's a lot of stuff. I agree that we need to invest. There's several buildings that are leaking rainwater. We have trash cans collecting water, and I don't think that's, I don't want to rub anyone the wrong way by pointing that out, but I think for me, like walking into an Abington Heights building, that was shocking. So I get the doom and gloom piece, and I'm hoping that the doom and gloom is not quite as bad, but I also think that we're faced with some stuff that has been compiling year after year after year, and we're going to have, some major investments that we're looking at.
Mr. Abella.
So the one thing that confuses me is everybody's blessing our business manager over there about how great he's done over the past 10, 12 years in administration. And they've listened to him, and they've done everything that they said, and everything's been fine. Well, this year, they're suggesting something different. So now this is the year we're going to decide to go against what they're suggesting?
No, they've suggested tax increases.
Okay, then I misunderstood. Then I stand corrected. Okay.
Ms. Carroll.
One of the things that we're talking about right now is facilities, but that's not really what I learned from the 2 budget presentations we just had. What we saw was a significant decrease in staff to the point where we were so lean that during COVID we did see issues arise that we hadn't seen before, and that's what we're looking at. So when we talk about something like class sizes, for instance, when you put all those kids on a Zoom screen and you're trying to teach a first grader to read, and then we see, okay, we have a reading gap, how are we going to fill that? Well, we need specialists. We need staff members who can do these jobs. And I think that that's really, I don't think the conversation is, are we raising taxes annually? If we did, I think part of that chart, and there are differences in county, in real estate assessments for each of those school districts. We did have a graph on that, and a lot of them did increase, most likely from commercial bases or other reasons. If we kept up with inflation, we probably would raise taxes, right? Like the price of milk goes up and we keep going. We're not doing that. What we've seen and what the administration has shown us is that during COVID we saw major gaps, and we saw, what's hard for me to articulate is how much of, again, our cyber charter crisis, that budget, that bill going up so high, wasn't just due to health. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to imply there? As a parent, I have 4 children in this district, and one of the most impacted years were children entering kindergarten in 2020 during the first, during the initial pandemic shutdown. I've seen the benefit of the staff members that came into these buildings. What we will see if we continue on without going back to the lean years where we had a graph up where we saw enrollment numbers and we saw staff numbers. And the staff bar chart, I think Dr. Shaver, you pointed out, was something like 3.5 kids per teacher.
Yeah, I believe the chart that you're alluding to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, over the last 12 years, we've cut approximately 13 staff in subcontracted out maintenance, custodial, and whatnot. And that was done in large part to balance the budget.
Okay, so tonight, I think the median age of our buildings is 61 years old. And we're not even on to facilities yet. Like, that's a conversation in future, and we will need to talk about alternative revenue streams, because I don't think raising taxes annually is on the agenda tonight. What I think we're discussing tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, is how we address the gap that COVID showed us and what investments we make in the classrooms now, moving forward. And again, to Rod's point, with these reasons to increase revenues, as a taxpayer, property owner, business owner, these are all great logistical reasons. As a parent who also has a background in education, I can see it within the classrooms. And I see those investments that we made paying off, and I see the investments that we're gonna have to continue to make. And some of those that we made this spring, which again, we did efficiently, was having our buildings fully staffed, having a principal and a school counselor in every building. So I just want to, in terms of my conversation on the budget tonight and what my opinions are, I think it's important that we go back to those original 2 presentations and really what this was about. Facilities is a big elephant in the room. I don't know what the right analogy is here, that's coming on the agenda. But this budget presentation that we received from Mr. Mirabelli and from Dr. Schaefer was really about making sure we staff and invest in the classrooms and the students and the education.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. Mr. Fleming.
Yep. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Azer, for your presentation and especially for the fair and balanced way, no pun intended, the way you presented it. So I do appreciate that. I personally think we should be proud that we have kept taxes in check over many years in this district. And it really hasn't had no impact on our success as our student body, the extracurriculars. Having said that, I do recognize that there are areas that we need to improve. We need to spend money. I don't think we can raise taxes to prosperity. It's going to make, in the scheme of things, it's going to make very little difference raising taxes 3.4%. And I think there's still too many unknowns with this budget to say definitively that we needed an increase. Everybody keeps throwing out the facilities assessment. I think that's really the elephant in the room, and it includes not only the physical structure, but the infrastructure, the safety issues associated with our district, which we know are many. I'd prefer to wait until we get the facilities assessment completed and we prioritize those projects and really understand what we're up against, and then put it out as a referendum. Let the community decide, do we want to pay more, for our publicly owned school district. I don't feel comfortable raising taxes on behalf of the community at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Mr. Abdallah.
Mr. Mirabelli, real quick, the budget without the tax increase deficit is, I'm sorry,
3.3.
I believe it was about 3.3.
3.3.
and the budget deficit with the tax increase is,
2.5.
Thank you.
I should have asked you. So the tax increase is just getting us into a lesser hole. Is that accurate, to dummy it down?
Yes, there's
Okay.
a projected deficit in this budget now, right? So the recommendation on increasing taxes, now it pains me as a taxpayer and the architect of a lot of these initiatives to cut costs here, pains me to come to the table with something like that. But when you recommend a tax increase of that nature, we're thinking about the 10 or so teachers that we hired with stimulus funds, which will be expiring 2 years from now. Actually, next year, half of the funds will expire, the other year, the other half. So there's a structural problem. We also have the Act 1 index limitation on what we can do. You can't make up that kind of revenue in 1 year's time. I also think about the professional staff contract that we agreed to that steps up by about $600,000 to $700,000 annually. So that's additional expense that will go up and up. Also looking at a job market where we used to have an outgoing step 15 teacher be coming in with a bachelor's degree step 1. We're not doing that largely anymore. We're stealing from other districts because the candidate pool is so much different. Also looking at the charter school expenditures that exploded by $1 million that we haven't begun to start to pay for. Yes, we've paid for it out of reserves, but that is a structural problem unless we can bring that down permanently, and we aren't sure that we can do that. So there are a lot of factors that go into this structural deficit when we come up with a recommendation like that. We take it seriously, and then when there is no additional revenue in years where the board says zero tax increase, well, that tells administration what they have to do, and that largely is an austerity type situation where the task is to cut costs wherever possible. So just to give you some insight into what the administration's exercise is, when I say status quo, that means maintain what we have. And that's the genesis of where we're coming from with this budget.
And the tax increase doesn't even get us to status quo because we're still $2.5 million in the hole. Projected.
And that's the projection. But the other thing that happens throughout the year is efficiencies are sought, costs are cut during the year. We don't just say we're going to spend this and then go spend it, right? So we look to find efficiencies throughout the year, every year, knock down costs, maximize revenues wherever possible to the extent we can, and that's what we do. So I would be very disappointed if we come in with this kind of a deficit at the end of the year, right? We'll work on that. I can't guarantee you that we'll eliminate that kind of a deficit, though.
Okay, thank you.
So, did you have something?
I was going to say, and Jim budgets very conservatively.
Yeah, as you should. As you should.
Exactly.
So I do have a statement from Mr. Acker that he asked me to read. He's on the phone, but he's actually out of the country and was not comfortable with the reception of the call, so he asked me to read something. Before I read that, to finish our discussions, Ms. Karam asked, is it really relevant, the facilities work that might be necessary? And some other people talked about it as well. I do think that even if we had brand new facilities, not brand new, but even if we had no facility issues right now that were major, and I think we do, I do agree that we have structural deficits projected that are not going to go away. But I don't think you shouldn't include the facilities issues in at least in the discussion, because I don't personally think that we should be relying on a referendum to solve our major facilities needs. A referendum is extremely difficult. The last time one was successful in Pennsylvania, and I was just told this week by a superintendent that was involved in it that it was the only one that's been successful. So there's been one referendum in the state of Pennsylvania, if that data is correct, and if it's not correct, it's a small number. It was State College in 2014. And a referendum is when, for people that don't know what it is, it's if you have to go above the index in order to pay for a bond deal. So Ms. Tierney mentioned there's other ways to pay for facilities needs, bonds or a referendum. If we issue let's say we have 40, 50, 60 million dollars, it could be bigger, could be smaller, whatever the number is, it's in the tens of millions. I've seen the buildings, my kids are in them. So they're old and they need work. Some people would think we need a lot, some people would think we need at least a little. It's a significant number. And whatever that number is, if you issue bonds, if you go out into the municipal bond market and you issue bonds, you have to pay for them over, let's say, 30 years. It's a few $1,000,000 a year if you do a $50 million bond deal. Now, unfortunately, a couple years ago, it was a lot less because interest rates were lower, and that's another issue we face. Getting that approved, you have to have a majority vote in a primary election, which is very difficult. And I think that we can do it too. I want to try it. Not because I actually want to try it. I don't think we have a choice. I've looked at the numbers, and I don't see how we do, other than fixing what breaks, which is sort of what I've seen happen in the school district for the last 10 years, other than a couple of really nice projects. The turf was great, the field are great, but it's mostly been when things break, we fix them. I don't want to rely on a referendum to pay for what I think are going to be bigger facilities needs, and that's a contributing factor, at least to me, when I think about these numbers. So before I read Mr. Acker's message, I'll give everybody a chance since I spoke one more time.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you're saying and make sure everyone understands that these are options. These are not clearly my opinions. These are just different options that that are upon us to be able to make decisions if we go forward with large projects. So it's not like I'm in favor of it. I'm just saying that these are just the different options.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Acker, you still with us?
Yes, I'm waiting to put words in your mouth.
All right, you still want me to read this? Give you one more chance? Okay, great. Dear Abington, this is from Mr. Acker, so I won't put my mask on for Mr. Acker to make it look like I'm speaking, but Dear Abington Heights School Board members and members of the public, I am sorry I cannot attend the board meeting tonight, which includes voting on the budget for the coming year. I've asked a fellow board member to read these comments when the motion comes up. This past year has been extraordinary for all of us. COVID, masking, political turmoil, changes to the board and administration at Abington Heights, adding challenges and stretching district capabilities to the maximum. In the last year, teachers and our administration have performed incredibly well, and our students and families have shown a resilience I suspect they did not know they had. They have been patient with us and helped us get through the year. Thank you to the whole Abington Heights community. There are some good things that have come out of the past year. We recognize the need for better communication. Dr. Schaefer and his team have made changes we all hope improves the transparency of the process, along with a better flow of information. We recognize the need for increased learning support and counseling personnel to help our student body deal with the COVID fallout. Additionally, we responded to requests for more nurses, counselors, and principals in every school. We have started the process to take a critical look at facilities and the requirements for new programs. The results of these efforts will be complete later this year or early next year. No doubt it will tell us of a need for substantial investments just to stay current. This is all good. However, past increases in the number of personnel, contracted increases in personnel salaries and related benefits, and increased migration to charter schools has created a structural deficit in the district budget. In years past, the district has been able to overcome deficits through cost savings, staff reductions, outsourcing, and deferring non-essential facility work. I do not believe we will be able to do that again. Truly, the well is empty. Personnel costs, which account for 75% of the district expenses alone, are increasing at an average of 3% per year. In order to balance the budget, we have to start looking at the revenue side of the income statement. Currently, Abington Heights generates the 8th lowest revenue per student of all school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Admirably in the past, we held taxes steady when other districts in northeastern Pennsylvania raised them. But it is my strong belief that we now need to raise taxes this year to the allowed index. This will not completely solve the structural deficit, but I believe it will have a positive impact. Abington Heights needs to build on the work started this past year and provide the support our children need. Unfortunately, this has increased the cost structure of the district. Respectfully, Warren Acker. Thank you, Mr. Acker. Okay, if there's not anyone else, I'd ask for a roll call.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
I'm not understanding this question. This is stating to approve the final budget as contained with a tax increase of what amount?
3.4%.
3.4%?
Correct.
No.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
No.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
No.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-3.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Next item on the list.
Yeah, hold on, we're just looking for the new. Oh, thank you very much. Mr. Azar asked that the board consider a motion to approve, we already did, the athletic EDR positions that were amended in the beginning of this session for 2022-23.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the 2022-23 homestead and farmstead exclusion resolution. See item 10.
So moved.
Second?
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Azar, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the agreement between Abington Heights School District and Jocelyn Oak Hill of Acorns to Oaks Consulting LLC, items 11.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
I missed this one. What was this one about?
This one is about evaluations
Okay.
for special education.
Yeah. Sorry.
Roll call?
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Is that the last one?
Yes, that was it for action items.
Do we have any new business?
I would like to say a huge shout out to all of our graduating class of 2022, all of our administrators and teachers district-wide who participated. It was a absolutely wonderful night. We had beautiful weather, and I just want to give a big shout out to everybody involved. This is something that was something we really took for granted. And as an educator and a former high school principal, I was really bummed the last couple years with how high school graduation was. So it was nice to kind of get back in it, have the sun shine on your face, and see kids running around throwing up their hats. So, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Saber. Ms. Tierney?
Old business.
Any old business?
Can I get an update on your summer program that's going on for our students? Do we have, is there a summer?
Are you talking about extended school year for
Yes,
students with
yes.
special education?
Yeah, how's that going?
So that would start the week of 4th of July, and it lasts
Oh,
4 weeks, and it's
okay.
Monday through Thursday.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. I'll ask that next month.
How's the enrollment?
I don't have exact numbers of what the enrollment is right now. I believe we won't know, I mean, parents commit, but then, and once they start, we have an idea, because sometimes people change their minds and don't show up.
Any other
So
open-
the students that you identified that had COVID issues, that were slower in the process of education, was there any summer programs offered for our regular ed students that were identified as having some cognitive issues with catching up with their classes?
So we offered a summer academy last year to help close that gap, and then we had a significant amount of supports in the schools this year to help close that gap. And I spent a significant amount of time looking at our benchmarks at the elementary, and I'm really confident that we've done a really nice job closing that gap, but we'll continue to work on it.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's beautiful. So congratulations for that great year.
Thank you, Dr. Vitale. Anyone else? Have a motion to adjourn? All right, good night, everyone. Thank you.